Hi Elizabeth, thank you for joining me for this chat. I'd hoped we could talk a bit about your role at Nexer Digital, your relationship with technology, and your own experiences of accessibility, inclusion, and approaching it both personally and professionally. If it's okay, maybe we could talk a bit initially about yourself and your role. What does a typical day look like to you?
Well, I don't know, there's not really a typical day. I do mostly user research, although I do other things. I'm in the middle of writing a blog post about accessibility statements.
Yeah.
And I've just come off how long was it? 3.5 months project. Yeah, so I'm on the user research team and I do other things.
I know that in the past we've chatted a bit about the challenges around maybe accessibility that you yourself personally have encountered. And I wondered if you'd maybe mind talking to us about either some tools you've used or how this experience itself shaped your views on accessibility.
Well, since I started using technology, things have changed. I've become less flexible. I mean, I've grown quite a lot older, obviously. I have essential tremor. I've had it since my late 40s. It gets a little bit worse year after year. It's mostly in my hands, although people notice my head shaking too sometimes. And it's more pronounced in my left hand than it is in my right hand. I make a lot of typos on my mobile. And particularly on the side, I make a lot of double E's, double W's, double S's when I don't mean to, just because when I'm hitting that key, my thumb will vibrate. And I'll hit it twice without meaning to. I have set the setting on my phone that requires a certain gap between two taps of the same thing, but apparently that doesn't work with the keyboard, and I don't know why. So something needs to change with that. And this also means that the targets for tapping, it would help if they were a little bit larger. Sometimes a target is so small, particularly on the banner ads on the phone, the little X to dismiss them is tiny. And sometimes I tap the banner when I mean to tap the X, and that sends me to the advertisement. And the main tools that I use are my reading glasses, which are bifocal. They're a mix of computer glasses on the top and reading on the bottom. And I got those last summer after my cataract surgery. And I've also found that I need to magnify the screen a little bit more than I used to. I used to use Word at 100%, and now I use it at 125, 150.
Yeah.
Just because I need a little more and a little larger text than I used to. And I also find that even with the glasses, I need more light when I'm reading on paper than I used to. And that is increasing contrast. And the biggest challenge, the biggest accessibility challenge that I have with websites is when they don't have high enough contrast between the text and the background. I used the WebAIM contrast checker, and I'm very fond of using the Contact Us link on a website that doesn't meet the contrast requirements and telling them, here's your problem, see this. And I sign off with, I know that you want your website to be accessible with people who don't have perfect vision. So I thought you'd like to know about this. And usually I get very nice responses saying, thank you, we'll look into it. Once in a while they say, well, we've created this alternative website which people can go to, and it's just not.
Would you say that that's maybe something that companies can look at as not an easy win, but something that's quite actually easy to facilitate, and that they can apply to their own digital services, that kind of making sure that you've got your color contrast, making sure that your text is sized appropriately? Yeah.
Rather than specifically appropriately sized text, I would say more important is not to have too big a discrepancy between the largest text and the smallest text.
Right.
Because if you increase the font size so that the small one is legible and I sometimes have to increase it a couple times, you don't want the big one to become so large that it takes up half the screen when it's showing. So there shouldn't be that much difference between the biggest and the smallest. I also find that my hearing is not what it used to be. I used to have exceptionally good hearing, and now it's down to normal, but it feels like it's not adequate. And so, and I do find that background noise gets in the way more than it used to. I mean, this is not going to affect some organizations because they don't do entertainment videos, but some of them do informational videos. And if I'm watching an informational video, I need to be able to hear it to understand what the person is talking about and how they're explaining how to do something. It needs to be clear, without distortion, and sometimes I need to turn it up higher than I used to. You know, one thing that just occurred to me related to color contrast is that, you know, some companies have a set of brand colors that where some combinations they do meet the requirements for contrast and some don't.
Right.
And I'd say in those cases, the company needs to make it clear which ones can be used on top of which others, because for the text background contrast, it needs to meet the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines standard. And some of those combinations do and some don't. So the company needs to pay attention to that and not just use a combination because it's in their brand.
Yeah, I suppose that kind of information could really do with being included in the brand pack itself.
Uh-huh.
I know it's quite hard to pick out specifics, but in your professional career, is there anything that you would consider a key takeaway in terms of what you've learned about accessibility and inclusion? It's a tough one. I know it's a very general question.
Well, I think the important thing is that people age at different rates and their bodies change at different rates. And you can't say, would a 75-year-old be able to do this? Because the answer is maybe, maybe not.
Yeah.
And you can't talk about older people in general because some people are still really sharp at 95 and some people are starting to go downhill much earlier than that. And arthritis progresses at different rates. I have arthritis in my hands as well, so that exacerbates the tremor because I don't have a very strong grip with my thumbs. So I would say it's all about not generalizing. I think of accessibility as a factor of the product and inclusion as a factor of the process or the attitude. I will also say that accessibility or inclusion in employment is also important. That providing whatever assistive technologies are needed, making sure that the organizational culture is inclusive of people of all ages and all abilities. That's really important. So it's not just about the users of the technologies we build. It's also about I don't want to call them users, but the people who are who take advantage of or who make use of our collegiality and our employment, and that they're all important.
Well, that does feel like an excellent point to kind of wrap up this chat. I'd like to thank you for talking to us and sharing some of your insights. It's really interesting and it's really great to kind of hear about your experiences. Yeah, so thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Thank you.